My name is Rebecca Hayes. I'm 41, and the last time my family saw me, I was supposedly a failure washing dishes at a truck stop diner in Nebraska. That was 3 years ago when my older sister Emma stood in our childhood kitchen, her perfectly manicured finger pointing at my worn-out jeans and oil-stained work shirt. "Look at yourself, Becca," she'd said, her voice dripping with that familiar mixture of pity and disgust. "Mum and Dad would be rolling in their graves if they could see what you've become." My brother Jake had nodded along, arms crossed, wearing that expensive suit he loved to flash around. "We tried to help you after the military thing didn't work out," he'd said, "but you can't help someone who doesn't want to be helped." The military thing, that's what they called my 8 years as an MP in the army, my 2 tours overseas, my Bronze Star. The military thing. I remember standing there in silence, letting them say their piece. Emma was announcing her engagement to some hedge fund manager named Preston, and Jake was going on about his promotion at the law firm. They'd invited me to Sunday dinner specifically to tell me I wasn't welcome at the wedding. "It's nothing personal," Emma had lied, not meeting my eyes. "It's just Preston's family is very traditional, very successful. I can't have them thinking we come from this kind of background." This kind of background, a dishwasher sister. Jake had pulled out his checkbook then, like he was doing me some grand favor. "Here's $5,000. Get yourself cleaned up. Maybe take some classes, but don't contact us again until you've got your life together." I'd looked at that check for a long moment. $5,000. To them, it was pocket change. To me, it represented everything they thought I was worth. I left it on the counter and walked out. What they didn't know, what they couldn't have known, was that I hadn't been washing dishes for 3 years. I'd been deep undercover for the U.S. Marshal Service, working a complex operation to bring down a human trafficking ring that stretched from the Midwest truck stops all the way to the Mexican border. The diner job was my cover, the worn clothes, the fake financial struggles, even the deliberately shabby apartment I'd shown them pictures of. It was all part of the longest undercover assignment of my career. 3 years of 18-hour days. 3 years of earning the trust of some of the most dangerous people in America. 3 years of living in constant danger to save lives they'd never even know existed. But to Emma and Jake, I was just their embarrassing little sister who couldn't get her act together. The irony wasn't lost on me. While they were climbing their respective career ladders, I was a deputy U.S. Marshal with the Marshal Service's Special Operations Group, one of only 47 women in the most elite fugitive hunting unit in federal law enforcement. My actual salary was more than double what Jake made as a junior partner. My security clearance was higher than anyone in my family could ever dream of obtaining, but I couldn't tell them. Not then. Not until the operation was complete, and the targets were in custody. The bust came down on a Tuesday in March. 17 arrests across 4 states, including 3 high-value targets who'd been on the most wanted list for over 2 years. The operation I'd spent 3 years building from the inside had dismantled one of the largest human trafficking networks in the country. That Friday, I got the call I'd been waiting for. Marshal Hayes, my supervisor's voice was warm with satisfaction. "Pack your real clothes. You're going home." Home. I hadn't been home, really home, in 3 years. The wedding was scheduled for Saturday, Emma's perfect spring wedding at the Riverside Country Club, the same venue where our parents had celebrated their 25th anniversary before the accident. Jake had texted me the details months ago, probably forgetting that he'd officially uninvited me. Or maybe it was his way of twisting the knife a little deeper. I almost didn't go. Part of me wanted to just file my report, take my overdue leave, and disappear to some beach somewhere to decompress from 3 years of living a lie. But another part of me, the part that still remembered being 12 years old and watching Emma win every academic award while Jake lettered in 3 sports, the part that remembered always being introduced as the other Hayes kid, that part wanted to see their faces when they realized exactly who they'd been talking to in that kitchen 3 years ago. I arrived at the country club just as the ceremony was beginning. I had driven straight from headquarters in my personal vehicle, a black Ford Explorer with government plates that most people wouldn't look at twice. I was wearing my dress uniform for the first time in months, navy blue with the distinctive 5-pointed star badge of the U.S. Marshal Service, my rank insignia clearly visible on my shoulders, my ribbon rack telling the story of a career they knew nothing about. The Bronze Star sat at the top, followed by 2 meritorious service medals, a Joint Service Combination Medal, and the Combat Action Badge from my Army days. Below those were my Marshal's service decorations, the Medal of Valor, the Exceptional Service Award, and 3 letters of commendation from the director himself. I could have worn civilian clothes. I could have slipped in quietly and sat in the back. But I wanted them to see me, really see me. For the first time in my life, I wanted my family to know exactly who I was. The security at the country club was typical for a high-end venue. One bored-looking guy in a cheap suit, checking invitations at the door. He looked up as I approached, and I saw his eyes take in my uniform, my badge, the way I carried myself. "Good afternoon, Marshal," he said, stepping aside without asking for an invitation. The ceremony had already started. I could see Emma in her white dress, radiant and perfect as always, standing beside a tall man in an expensive tuxedo. Jake stood near the altar as best man, looking every inch the successful attorney in his custom suit. I took a seat in the very back row behind a group of Preston's relatives who whispered among themselves about the stock market and vacation homes in the Hamptons. A few people turned to look at me. It's hard to miss a federal law enforcement officer in dressed uniform, but most were focused on the ceremony. The irony of it all hit me again. Here I was, watching my sister marry into money and status, while wearing the uniform of an agency that most people only saw in movies. The same sister who told me I was an embarrassment to the family was saying her vows 30 feet away from a deputy U.S. Marshal who'd just spent 3 years taking down some of the worst criminals in America. The ceremony concluded without incident. Emma and Preston kissed, the crowd applauded, and everyone began moving toward the reception hall. I stayed in my seat, watching the family dynamics I knew so well play out in front of me. Emma was in her element, graciously accepting congratulations from Preston's well-heeled family and friends. Jake worked the room like the politician he'd always wanted to be, making connections and dropping names. Neither of them noticed me. It wasn't until the reception was in full swing that the moment came. I was standing near the bar, nursing a club soda and watching the festivities from the periphery, when I overheard Preston's mother talking to a group of his relatives. "Emma's family is charming," she was saying, "though I understand she has a sister who's been struggling some kind of service industry work." Emma mentioned very sad, really. "That's unfortunate," replied an older man who I recognized as Preston's uncle, some kind of investment banker. "These military types often have trouble adjusting to civilian life. It's a real problem in this country." "Oh, the sister wasn't really military," Preston's mother corrected. "Just some kind of security job that didn't work out." Emma was very discreet about it, but you could tell she was embarrassed. The girl is apparently working in a diner somewhere, barely making ends meet. I felt that familiar heat rising in my chest, the same feeling I'd had in the kitchen 3 years ago. But this time was different. This time I wasn't undercover. This time I didn't have to stay silent. "Excuse me?" I said, stepping into their conversation circle. "I couldn't help but overhear you talking about Emma's sister." Preston's mother turned to look at me, taking in my uniform with obvious surprise. "Oh, I'm sorry, officer. Are you here in some official capacity?" "Actually," I said, keeping my voice level and professional, "I am Emma's sister." The silence was immediate and complete. Preston's mother's eyes widened as she took in my uniform again, really seeing it this time: the 5-pointed star badge, the rank insignia, the ribbon rack that told the story of nearly 15 years of service to my country. "I think there's been some misunderstanding about my career," I continued. "I'm Deputy U.S. Marshal Rebecca Hayes, Special Operations Group. I've spent the last 3 years working undercover to dismantle a human trafficking network. Last Tuesday, we arrested 17 suspects and rescued 43 victims, including 12 children." Preston's uncle had gone pale. "You're a federal marshal?" "I am. And before that, I served 8 years in the Army Military Police, including 2 combat deployments in Afghanistan. I hold a Bronze Star for actions under enemy fire." Preston's mother looked like she was going to be sick, but Emma said what she believed to be true. I said, "My work requires a certain level of discretion, even from family." That's when Emma appeared beside me, having spotted the crowd that had gathered around our conversation. "Becca," she said, staring at me in my uniform, "what are you doing here? And what are you wearing?" I turned to face my sister, seeing her really look at me for the first time in years. Her eyes moved from my face to my badge, to my rank insignia, to the ribbons on my chest. "Hello, Emma," I said. "Congratulations on your wedding." "I don't understand," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You work at a diner. You've been washing dishes for 3 years. "No," I said. "I've been working undercover for the U.S. Marshal Service for 3 years. The diner was my cover story. Emma's face went through several shades of confusion before settling on something that looked like horror. You're lying. I reached into my jacket and pulled out my credentials, the leather wallet with my badge and photo ID that every deputy marshal carries. I handed it to her wordlessly. Emma's hands shook as she opened it and read my name, my rank, my photo, and uniform. Preston appeared beside her, reading over her shoulder. "Oh my God," Preston whispered. "You're actually a federal marshal. Special Operations Group," I confirmed. "We handle high-risk fugitive operations and complex undercover assignments." That's when Jake pushed through the crowd, having heard the commotion from across the reception hall. "What's going on here?" he demanded, then stopped short when he saw me. "Becca, what the hell are you wearing?" "This is my dress uniform," I said. "Jake, I'd like you to meet Deputy U.S. Marshal Rebecca Hayes. You might remember her as your dishwasher." Sister Jake's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. His eyes took in every detail of my uniform, from the perfectly pressed fabric to the gleaming badge to the ribbons that represented more courage and sacrifice than he'd ever shown in his comfortable office job. "Spios," he said finally. "You failed. Out of the military. You've been working minimum wage jobs for years." "I didn't fail out of anything," I said. "I completed my army service with honors and was recruited directly into the Marshal service. My starting salary as a deputy marshal was higher than what you made in your first 3 years at the law firm." The crowd around us had grown larger. Preston's family, Emma's friends, even some of the country club staff had gathered to watch this surreal family reunion play out. "But the money," Jake said weakly. "You needed money. You were struggling to pay rent." "My rent for the undercover apartment was paid by the federal government," I said, "along with my salary, my benefits, and a substantial hazard pay supplement for the danger involved in my assignment." Emma was crying now, though I wasn't sure if it was from embarrassment or relief or something else entirely. Preston stood beside her with his arm around her shoulders, looking like he was trying to process everything he was hearing. "Why didn't you tell us?" Emma asked through her tears. "Because I couldn't," I said. "Because my cover had to be complete and convincing, which meant even my family had to believe it. And because I paused, looking at both of them, because you made it very clear that you were ashamed of who you thought I was. You uninvited me to your wedding, Emma. You offered me money like I was some charity case. Jake, you told me not to contact you until I got my life together." The shame on their faces was palpable now. Emma couldn't meet my eyes, and Jake was staring at the floor. "I'm sorry," Emma whispered. "Becca, I'm so sorry." "I know," I said, and I did know. I could see in her face that she meant it, that she was genuinely horrified by how she treated me. Preston's mother stepped forward then, looking mortified. "Marshal Hayes, I owe you an enormous apology. The things I said about you. You said what you believed to be true based on the information you had." I said, "No harm done." But there was harm done, and we all knew it. Not to me. I was stronger now than I'd ever been, but to the relationships that might have been, to the trust that had been broken, to the years we'd lost because they couldn't see past their assumptions about success and failure. "Will you stay?" Emma asked, "for the reception. I know I don't deserve it, but I want you here. I want everyone to meet my sister, the federal marshal." I looked at her for a long moment, this woman who had been both my role model and my biggest critic. I thought about the scared 12-year-old girl who had worshipped her older sister and the undercover operative who had learned to survive on her own strength. "I'll stay for a while," I said finally. The rest of the reception was a blur of introductions and apologies. Preston's family couldn't have been more gracious once they understood who I actually was. His father, it turned out, was a federal judge who had worked with marshals throughout his career. His uncle had questions about my time in Afghanistan that showed genuine respect for my service. Emma barely left my side for the rest of the evening, introducing me to everyone as my sister, Deputy U.S. Marshal Rebecca Hayes. There was pride in her voice now, but also a desperate kind of need for forgiveness that I wasn't sure I was ready to give. Jake found me near the end of the evening as the reception was winding down. "Becca," he said, "I need to apologize. What I said 3 years ago, the way I treated you, it was inexcusable." "Yes," I said, "it was." He nodded, accepting that. "Is there any way we can start over?" I looked at my brother, this man who had always seemed so confident and successful, now standing before me with humility I'd never seen from him before. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I'm not the same person I was 3 years ago, Jake. I've seen things, done things that changed me. I don't need your approval anymore. I don't need anyone's approval. I understand, he said, but I'd like to try if you'll let me. As I drove away from the country club that night, still wearing my dress uniform, I thought about the girl I'd been and the woman I'd become. The scared kid who had always felt like she didn't measure up to her successful siblings was gone, replaced by someone who had stared down human traffickers and saved lives in the shadows. The best revenge, they say, is living well. But sometimes, the best revenge is simply becoming who you were always meant to be, regardless of whether anyone else notices or approves.